News of the Times, the Walsoken tragedy of 1885. Welcome to News of the Times. In today's episode, it is 1885 in a village within Norfolk. Long-time feuding married couple, the Goodales, have been heard to be at it again as Bathsheba Goodale, 47 years of age, runs out of her house looking for help and stating that her husband, 45-year-old Robert, is threatening to kill her. Things calm down, but it's not long after they're heard bickering again with each other, and then Bathsheba just vanishes. As the concerned sons and neighbours go out looking for her, Robert Goodale, the husband, repeatedly states that he is sure she's okay. And then it is noted that the water pulled from the well on his land now has a reddish tinge. We take a look at this interesting case of murder from Norfolk. What ended up eclipsing the murder itself was the utter failure of the execution, which ended up decapitating the prisoner. And in today's further particular story from around the same time, by chance, it is discovered that a dead and buried doctor has been replaced by a 200-pound hog. The general belief is that this is the work of God. One for the books at the cemetery. Can we ask, if this sounds like your kind of happy place, please may we ask you to push the thumbs up button. This helps tell YouTube that we are worthy for consideration to other potential viewers. Thank you. And now, on with our murder case from Victorian England. Background. Robert and Bathsheba Goodale had been married for over 20 years. They had two grown lads aged 21 and 18 who helped on their father's farm. The farm grew fruit and vegetables for sale, with the boys taking a share of the profit of the land they worked. The land itself had its own well and a large cottage used as a holding shed for surplus. Robert Goodale was said to like a drink, and when he was in drink, that he was particularly would quarrel with his wife Bathsheba. His usual complaint regarding her was what he perceived as her failings to keeping house, and also his perception of her nagging him. The whole of the neighbourhood was aware of the contentious relationship between the two. However, the fights between them seemed to be increasing in both frequency and violence. Some 3 weeks prior to the disappearance of Bathsheba, she is seen running out of the house looking for help, as she attests that Goodale has been threatening her with a knife. From the Norfolk News, the 5th of December 1885, it will be remembered that the prisoner occupied a piece of land on Walsoken Marsh near Wisbeck, which he cultivated as a market garden. On this property is situated a house, which, however, was not inhabited, but was used solely as a storehouse in which the prisoner deposited the produce of his land. Goodale, his wife, to whom he had been married about 22 years, and two sons, aged respectively 21 and 18 years, resided at Wisbeck, and as each member of the family took a share in the gardening operations, they were in the habit of going at 8 o'clock in the morning to the marsh, where they worked all day, and returned at 6 o'clock after the completion of their labours to their home in the little Cambridgeshire town. It appeared that the man and woman lived anything but a life of conjugal happiness, as frequent quarrels occurred between them with reference, it was alleged at the trial, to the way in which his wife discharged her household duties. These altercations were sometimes characterized by the extreme violence of the prisoner's conduct. On one occasion, about 3 weeks prior to the murder, Mrs. Goodale, in a state of great alarm and trepidation, ran to the house of a neighbour living in the vicinity of the marsh and asserted her husband had been threatening to take her life. The prisoner, who had been chasing her with a billhook in his hand, was heard to exclaim in an angry tone, "I'll chop you down if you don't come back." But he ultimately left, and his wife returned unmolested to Wisbeck. The family continued to pursue the routine of the life we have sketched until the 15th of September. The relationship quietens down until the 15th of September, when Bathsheba disappears. It's a normal day, but bickering has once again begun earlier in the day between the two Goodales. From the Norfolk News, the 5th of December, 1885. As customary, they were at work on the marsh and nothing of any consequence occurred till 4 o'clock, when a boy named George Gage, in the employ of the prisoner, saw Goodale and his wife near the storehouse. Gage was then driving some cows into an adjacent clover meadow, and having spoken to his master, went on with his duties, and saw no more either of him or Mrs. Goodale. On returning at 6 o'clock, Gage went to a well at the back of the storehouse to draw some water for the horses, and on the bucket coming to the surface, he observed that the liquid was discoloured and in quite a different state to what it had appeared at 12 that day, when it was perfectly clear and pure. Without paying much attention to the circumstances, the boy replaced the lid on the well as he had found it, and then went back to Wisbeck in company with one of the young Goodales. A few minutes subsequently to the time at which the Gage saw the prisoner and his wife together, a little boy named Kierman also noticed. Mrs. Goodale asked him to stay with her a short time and promised to give him some pears if he did so, but the lad, telling her that his father wanted him, went away. John Peck, a shoemaker belonging to Wisbeck at the same hour, was passing along the bank of the river Nene, which flows by the prisoner's land, when he heard a man and a woman at high words, but on coming close found the persons to be the prisoner and his wife. This was the last occasion on which the unfortunate woman was seen alive. It's unusual for Bathsheba to be missing. Her strange disappearance is noted quickly by her two sons and by neighbours. Almost stranger still is the behaviour and comments by the husband, Robert Goodale, who not only strangely has a wet trouser leg, but also is heard making ominous remarks. From the Norfolk News, the 5th of December, 1885, nothing more was noted of the prisoner's movements until 4:45 that same afternoon, when Samuel Hunt of Walsoken saw him wiping his boots on the grass by the side of the river. Hunt also observed that the legs of the man's trousers were wet to above the knees. Soon after this, Goodale was overtaken on his way back to Wisbeck by a youth named Spraggins, who was in charge of a railway dray and gave the prisoner a lift into the town. In the course of a conversation that ensued between them, Spraggins asked him how he was getting on with his fruit pulling, to which Goodale made the very ominous reply, "I think I've pulled all the fruit I shall ever pull," adding, "except an odd basket or so for the house." Mrs. Goodale, not arriving at her house that evening, to the various persons who asked him about her whereabouts, he replied he had left her at the marsh, that she was all right, and that she would turn up safely during the evening. The sons, who by this time had become alarmed through hearing no tidings of their mother, made a long and fruitless search. Goodale, apparently unconcerned, took no steps in assisting to find the missing woman, but retired to bed and arose at his usual hour in the morning. On going outside his house, he was met by a labourer named Barnes, who at that time knew nothing of Mrs. Goodale being missing, to whom the prisoner made another singular observation. I've done the damned job at last. Barnes asked, what job? And the prisoner answered, I've settled her. She won't bark at me any more. As concerned neighbours and the two sons begin scouring the area for any sign of Bathsheba, she is eventually found down the well on the farm. From the Norfolk News, the 5th of December 1885, later in the day, the dead body of Mrs. Goodale was found in the well above reference to. Frightful blows had been inflicted on the head, and the medical evidence showed that after being rendered insensible by these injuries, the poor woman was thrown into the well, where her actual death was caused by drowning. On this ghastly discovery being made, Goodale, who was on the spot at the time, was taken into custody on the charge of having murdered his wife, and his clothes, on being examined, were seen to be besmirched with blood. An inquest takes place where Robert Goodale is formally charged with the murder of his wife. Witnesses are collected within the small community and brought forward. From the Eastern Evening News, 22nd of September 1885, the charge of wife murder at Walsoken. Robert Goodale, 45, farmer, was on Monday brought up on remand before the Terrington bench on the charge of murdering his wife, Bathsheba Goodale, at Walsoken on the 15th inst. Mr. Mayor of Lynn appeared for the prisoner. Several witnesses were examined. A farm lad named Albert Gage, employed by the prisoner, deposed that almost every evening prisoner and his wife jangled, and that about 3 weeks ago he threatened to chop her down with a hedge hook. John Peck of Wisbeck, on the 15th inst, heard the noise as of a man and a woman quarrelling going in the direction of the prisoner's farm. A Wisbeck publican named Gray deposed to a conversation he had with the prisoner on the evening of the 16th as to the whereabouts of his wife, when prisoner said that she was all right when he left her in the afternoon. When the publican said that it was strange she had not returned, prisoner said she would turn up, for she had often been out late. James Barnes, a labourer of Wisbeck, said that on the 16th the prisoner remarked to her, I've done the job at last. When Barnes asked what job, the prisoner replied, I've settled her. She won't bark at me any more. But witness thought this bad reference. John Freeman of Walsoken heard a Mrs. Kierman say to the prisoner that it was a rum job, and asked him what he did it for. When the prisoner required, did what? Mrs. Kierman said, you know what you have done to your wife? Prisoner said, yes, I do. Mrs. Kierman said, what did you do it for? Prisoner answered, I ain't done nothing. There was then blood on the crown of the prisoner's hat. The finding of the body of Mrs. Goodale in the well having been deposed to, Mr. Groom, surgeon, described the injuries. There was a lacerated incised wound 3/4 of an inch long on the left side of the forehead. A like wound 1.5 inches long on the top of the head, and a semicircular wound on the right side of the head down to the bone. There was no fracture of the skull, but the brain was congested. The cause of death was drowning. The surgeon said that if Mrs. Goodale had fallen down the well, this would not have accounted for the injuries upon the deceased. A police constable produced the deceased's hat and ulster, which were found in the well. There were 3 cuts in the hat, and the ulster was torn in 2. The case will go to trial. The trial lasts a day and a half, with the large numbers of witnesses brought forward by the prosecution. Although the evidence is all purely circumstantial, yet it draws a clear linked chain pointing to Robert Goodale. Goodale himself pleads innocence, a defence along the lines of that he did not know what had happened to her. From the Norwich Mercury, the 26th of September 1885, the charge of wife murder at Terrington. At a special sitting of the Terrington bench on Monday, Robert Goodale, 45, farmer in Walsoken, was charged that he did on the 15th of September at Walsoken, feloniously, wilfully, and of his malice and aforethought, kill and murder Bathsheba Goodale, 49, his wife. Mr. J. W. Mayer defended. The depositions taken at Wisbeck when the prisoner was remanded were read over by the magistrate's clerk. The statement of P.C. Houghton was that when he arrested Goodale, he found spots of blood upon his hat and waistcoat, and his trousers were wet. Prisoner said the blood came from his nose bleeding, and his trousers had got wet as he walked down the marshes. Told that he would be taken into custody for the murder of his wife, he said, "It's a rum job. Where is my wife?" The witness, Houghton, afterwards went to the well in the yard of the prisoner's house, and the body of Mrs. Goodale was taken out. There were wounds about the head. Horses and cattle had been round the well and obliterated any footprints. The depositions of the clerk were also read, showing that in 1880 the prisoner was convicted at the Terrington bench for an aggravated assault upon his wife, was fined heavily and bound over to keep the peace for 6 months. Mrs. Goodale, having stated that after assaulting her he threatened to do for her and to shoot her, so that she had to rush out of the house. Albert George Gage, a lad of 13 who was in the employment of the prisoner, was then called and said on Tuesday he was working near the prisoner's house, and in consequence of what one of his sons said, went into the yard at a distance of 3 to 4 yards from the house, and this was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He saw the prisoner sitting on the river bank, and he also saw Mrs. Goodale in the yard. The latter was about 20 yards from the prisoner. The witness drew water from the well in the yard at noon that day for Mrs. Goodale, and later, a little after 6, he drew some water for the horses. The water was then black and muddy. At the dinner time there was a chain to the well. In the evening it was gone. The family with whom witness lived resided in Wisbeck. Here almost every evening the witness had heard the prisoner and his wife jangling. Prisoner used to swear at her, and about 3 weeks ago at the farm he ran after her with a hedge hook, exclaiming, "I will chop you down with it." Mrs. Goodale ran to a shop about 100 yards distant and escaped from the accused, who was in drink at that time. Witness had not seen the hook since. Mrs. Goodale was missed, but he saw it most days previously. The hook belonged to Goodale and was usually kept in the kitchen. The one produced, he believed, was the identical hook. Witness testimony is brought forward of friends and neighbours pressing Goodale to have more concern over the disappearance of his wife. Goodale persists in telling everyone that she's all right and will come back in her own time. Equally, Evidence is brought forward regarding his wet trousers and the blood found on his clothing. The widow of Goodale's brother comes forward to give testimony regarding Robert and Bathsheba's marriage. From the Norwich Mercury, the 26th of September, 1885, Sarah Ann Goodale, widow of the prisoner's brother, living in Wisbeck, said on Tuesday evening she saw the accused coming out of the house and the last witness just before 11 o'clock. He asked, "Where are the boys?" She replied, "They've gone to look for their mother." Prisoner had been married more than 20 years. Frequently of late, he and his wife had had quarrels, and they did not live happily together. She had often been in the house while they were quarrelling. Prisoner was generally in drink these times. She had heard rash words on both sides, and she remembered the prisoner declaring that he would knock his wife down, but she had never heard him threaten to kill her. She continued that she never knew him to quarrel with his wife except when in drink, always though it was the drink that made him quarrel. On that Tuesday night he was perfectly sober. She particularly noticed that he appeared quite cool and calm. The case ends with the description of the finding of Bathsheba's body and the surgeon's testimony regarding the injuries that she had sustained. From the Norwich Mercury, the 26th of September, 1885, William Tuke, gardener from Walsoken, said he was at the prisoner's house on Wednesday morning last, in company with Robert, the eldest son of the accused. They found the body in the well, which is 20 feet deep, the water being about 3 feet high. The body was bloody about the head, and when found, the head and feet were downwards and under water. Mr. William Grube, surgeon of Wisbeck, deposed that on Wednesday morning he went to the prisoner's house. He there saw the body of Mrs. Goodale and examined it. He first observed issuing from the mouth a frothy mucus, which was an indication of drowning. Upon examining the head, he found a lacerated incised wound 3/4 of an inch in length on the left side of the forehead, just below the hair. It was cut to the bone. He then noticed a second wound of a similar nature on the top of the head on the left side of the centre, about 1.5 inches in length, and there was also an incised wound on the right side of the head in a semicircular shape measuring about an inch. The last named wound was cut down to the bone, there being indentation in the bone. The right hand and the right arm were bruised. When the clothes were removed from the deceased's body, he noticed that there were 2 marks upon the left thigh. On the following morning, witness made a post-mortem commencing with the head. He found a fracture of the skull, but the brain was congested. The injuries upon the head were of a dangerous nature, but not necessarily fatal. He believed they produced concussion and insensibility. The cause of death was submersion. Asked if he supposed the top of the well had been open and Mrs. Goodale had fallen down, would that account for her death? He replied that it was not possible that the injuries upon the head the deceased could have been inflicted as the body fell down the well. In answer to further inquiries from the bench, Mr. Groom stated that it was his belief that the deceased was insensible when her body fell down the well. He formed this opinion on the account of the severity of the injuries on the head, and from the fact that the pupil of one of the eyes was dilated. Mr. Stone produced the straw hat which belonged to the deceased. In it there were 3 cuts. The ulster which the deceased used to wear and which was found in the well, he produced also, and it was torn in halves and much damaged. Witness saw the ladder which was pointed out to him on the premises. It was stained with blood. It takes the jury only 15 minutes to find Robert Goodale guilty of the murder of his wife, Bathsheba. The judge in passing sentence states his complete agreement with the verdict and that in his opinion a more atrocious murder had seldom been committed. Throughout the trial, Goodale was seen to act indifferently and only appeared to show any interest when shown the straw hat of his wife with the telltale indentions on the hat that corresponded with the wounds in her head. In prison, Goodale is considerably and acting as a model prisoner as he enthusiastically agrees to religious teachings. On the evening before his sentence, Goodale urgently wishes to speak to the governor of the prison. From the Norfolk News, the 5th of December 1885, on Friday, he was visited by his sister and his two sons, who took leave of him for the last time. In the evening of that day, the governor of the castle received a communication from the prisoner and immediately attended him in company with the chief warder. On arriving at the condemned cell, the prisoner told the official that he wished to disclose something which he had on his mind, and he then stated that he struck his wife in consequence of her saying that she liked another man better than him. After that he struck her down with a piece of iron which lay on the ground near him. He pleaded extreme provocation, and from the circumstances disclosed, the governor at once forwarded the document containing the confession to the Home Secretary and communicated with the Reverend Wheeler. Subsequently, Mr. Wheeler and the ex-sheriff of Norwich proceeded to London and had an interview with the Under-Secretary of State, but the efforts they were made on behalf of the prisoner were of no avail, and the governor received a letter from the Under-Secretary on Sunday morning stating that the Home Secretary had decided not to advise any interference but the due course of the law. The execution will move forward with Berry acting as executioner. No one could have predicted what would happen next. From the Illustrated Police News, the 5th of December, 1885, execution at Norwich, horrible scene. The execution of Robert Goodale, 45, a gardener, for the murder of his wife, Bathsheba, on September the 15th at Walsoken near Wisbeck, by inflicting wounds on her head and then throwing her down a well, took place on Monday morning inside Norwich Castle. Berry of Bradford was the executioner. Only one representative of the press was admitted. Since his committal, the prisoner's conduct had been most exemplary. He made confession of his guilt, but pleaded extraordinary provocation, alleging very immoral conduct on the part of the deceased woman. The Reverend Thomas Wheeler, a Baptist minister, attended upon Goodale from the previous Monday to his execution. At 3 minutes to 8, Goodale was brought from the condemned cell and met by the executioner, who quickly pinioned him. The procession then moved on toward the scaffold, which was erected over a deep pit. The acting under-sheriff and jail surgeon were present. When the rope was put around the convict's neck and the cap over his face, he was heard to exclaim, "Good God, receive my soul." Berry then pulled the lever, the trap door fell away, and Goodale, who weighed between 15 stone and had a 6-foot drop, disappeared. To the horror of the bystanders, the rope rebounded, and it was thought it had become unfastened. But upon the bystanders looking into the pit, they were horrified to see upon the floor the decapitated trunk of the convict. At the inquest on the body, the executioner and the jail surgeon were examined as to what occurred. Both the governor of the jail and Berry stated that the machinery of the drop was in perfect order and worked satisfactorily. Berry said that after pinioning Goodale, he walked him towards the drop when, being rather frightened, he faltered, so he had to push him forward. After the usual routine, he asked Goodale if he had anything to say. He answered no. Berry pulled the lever and Goodale dropped from top to the bottom of the pit, which was 11 feet 5 inches deep. His head came off as clean as if cut with a knife. The head and body fell together. Berry said the length of the drop was not unusual, but at Durham he gave Lawson, who weighed 16 stone, an 8-foot drop. The rope did not break. Berry could only account for what occurred by Goodale having a thin vertebrae. Mr. Robinson, the jail surgeon, said Barry, who was perfectly sober, carried out his duties coolly and properly. On the drop falling, he saw the head separate from the body. Death was instantaneous. What occurred could not have been foreseen. The long drop and decapitation was a most merciful death, much more merciful than a short drop and allowing a person to struggle. The jury found the customary verdict and said no one was to blame. Further particulars. Working within a Victorian cemetery must have rivaled working in the luggage area of a train station in a, well, what will today bring kind of way, as has been pointed out by one of our wonderful subscribers. A grave that is drawing the repeated attention of neighbourhood dogs finally pushes the staff to open the grave, only to see that it is not the grave of the well-liked neighbourhood doctor, as expected. From the Evening Bulletin, the 10th of February 1894, what became of the doctor's corpse? It's a cold day when Vanceburg's newspaper correspondent can't scare up a special. The following is his latest, and he asserts that its truth is vouched for by his informant. He says Dr. C. H. Dyer, who lives in Fleming County near the Lewis County line, and who was well known throughout this section of the state as a very noted root and herb doctor, died some weeks ago and was buried at his home near Muse Mills, Fleming County. A few days ago, a pack of hunting dogs were discovered digging with might and main in the doctor's grave. They were driven away but returned as soon as the men left and re-began their digging and howling. The friends of the deceased doctor became anxious to know just what the dogs were after and concluded to take the body up. They did so, but what was their astonishment when, on opening the coffin, they found not the body of the venerable doctor, but a 200-pound hog, nicely rolled up in a winding sheet, waiting for Gabriel to toot his horn, when he would walk out and claim the doctor's share in the glories that await him at the final resurrection of the just. The conclusion of the natives as to how this transformation came about is that as the doctor was not above suspicion from a moral standpoint, the Lord had changed his mortal remains into those of a hog. The case is a very remarkable one, viewed from any standpoint. That concludes this episode of the Walsoken tragedy of 1885. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, we would be grateful if you could like and comment and or share the video to friends, family, or even the family pet. It all helps to keep us relevant in the giant ocean that is YouTube. Thank you. All support is gratefully appreciated. You've been listening to News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles.